Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone here in Lebanon. We had the chance to welcome everybody in the UK, so I would like to welcome everybody here in Lebanon. It is truly an honor for me to kick off with introducing our first panel for this conference. First of all, of course, I have the honor of introducing Her Excellency, Dr. Rima Karami, who is the Minister at the Ministry of Education in Lebanon. She is also a renowned scholar in education reform and leadership at AUB. We are honored to have her as a keynote speaker at this conference, where she will be presenting on the topic of humanitarian responses and governance of the Lebanese Ministry of Education and Higher Education. She will be followed by Ms. Rabie, which Maha will introduce shortly, and then we will end this panel with Professor Cathrine Brun, who's the Deputy Director at CLS. She's a human geographer, and her research interests concern on forced migration, education, and conflict. Her approach to research is qualitative and ethnographic, with action research as a central way of co-producing knowledge. She is also the lead of the ERIC project, which is the Lebanon Education Research in Conflict and Protracted Crisis funded by the FCDO. Your Excellency, Minister Rima Karami, please welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be in this hybrid format, double hybrid format for me. First, between Lebanon and Cambridge, but also between my ministerial mission and my real life of being a scholar in education. So thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Maha, Shuayb, for giving me this the forum to share with you where we are at, and hopefully that in terms of reflections at what is happening in Lebanon and the state of education from the perspective of the Ministry of Education, and that hopefully this will be an added value to what is being discussed in this very important conference. So I'll start with some background. International aid began for education has begun during the Lebanese Civil War, and it began as an attempt to offset a collapse in the public sector ability to deal with the situation. It has been going on over decades. I know the focus is on this last phase that we are in, but I think for the Ministry of Education, this has been quite a history and an accumulation of reaching out to international agencies and to donors to really rescue the ministry, a fragile ministry in a state of most of the time crisis in the country, you know, surrounded with the crisis. So over the decades, support expanded in response to these crises, and what it accompanied in chronic underfunding. And then also it evolved from emergency relief to sustaining education system functionality. I'll be going in details here. Post-2019 had been, I would say, historic mode of being in crisis in Lebanon and in the Ministry of Education. I think we topped the scale in countries and in ministries in what we had to deal with. Of course, the economic collapse was again a huge marker, and it intensified Lebanon's dependency on the donor support. And ultimately, where we are at now is that aid that we are receiving is barely enough to maintain school operation, teacher salaries, and infrastructure, with all the commitments, of course, that the ministry has to fulfill in terms of inclusive education, providing education for every child in the country, which is maintained mostly with the influx of the Syrian refugees through double shift schools for the Lebanese and displaced learners. So this has made the aid delivery added in the complexity and added in the fragmentation. So the donor mechanism, it became really more challenging for them to really integrate whatever they are offering to support the country in crisis response with the ability of the country to do some type of national planning, strategic planning for development. And yes, with that, it became a, as much as partnerships are so important, but at the same time, the shift in authority where the funding come from typically takes authority, but then the formal authority of the ministry became compromised. So there was quite a bit of overlap in the responsibilities of responding to these crises. So this is kind of in big strokes. So if I want to take a few minutes to probably Maha covered some of this, but to talk in the case about Lebanon, but to talk about the funding, like, I don't know if how clear the font is. I know it's small, but I'll read it for you. So what we did, we tried to just look into phases. We didn't go back all the way to the civil war. We started with 2011, which is, of course, the start of the Syrian crisis. And we looked at the phases of interventions that were there, divided them, ending with what is present. So I'm going to really read it horizontally and leave just the last column to the end to give you the picture about where we are at in terms of receiving the funding to support how we're trying to serve the children. So in terms of objectives, in between 2011 and 2015, which was the phase one of the crisis response, it was mostly emergency education support for the Syrian refugees. So an immediate reaction to try to see how can we help the kids of the families that were displaced to Lebanon. The race one is where there is more crisis response development, more strategic planning, but still very much focused on the assumption was that it will be over soon. So let's see how we can focus on refugee education. And in that period specifically, a lot shifted. There was a dramatic shift to the focus became on those refugees and in a little bit in undermining the focus on what was already ongoing to try to help the ministry to really serve its own children and also the communities that are vulnerable that were already there, whether Palestinians or others. So there is the 2017 to 2021, then it become let's do inclusion and let's see if we can support a little bit the community that is serving those students and see if there's something that can improve their services. And, all the way to the last phase, the focus was in that period, let's improve education outcome and governance through result-based financing. And this is where also this period marked a major shift in how financing was doing. So the governance in the beginning, UN agencies, some Maha participation, parallel systems. Then we moved to, it is led by Maha with partner support, and it is more project-based. Then we moved to, okay, it's Maha-led, a steering committee and joint review missions in S2R2 because it became result-oriented. It is more Maha executing, and then World Bank managing trust funds and dispatching the funds upon delivery of the results. When we come to data, where the data was in the first phase, it was NGO managed data limited coordination with the SIMS data. In race one, it became more fragmented, primarily NGO, donor managed, and then limited use of the SIMS system. And then we said, like the shift was, okay, let's strengthen the SIM system and try to do some learning assessment. And again, SIMS data, when it moved to hold this result-based, it became a source of data to be able to dispatch. There was, of course, the line of the third-party verification, the accountability mechanism, the United Nations reporting mechanism. There was no integration with Maha, so they just, there was a system of accountability very separate from that. Phase 2 moved to project level reporting by implementers, so limited national audits, and also again, the following phase, monitoring embedded in national strategy and third-party verification results shared with donors. So this quite a bit continued in that manner. The other line I would like to highlight is the donor coordination. So when it started, of course, it was an immediate response to the crisis. It was quite fragmented, very parallel between UN and NGOs. It continued to be fragmented until with Race 2, there was a shared framework that kind of brought it a little bit together. And then there was some coordination via World Bank when the donations came to the World Bank, and the World Bank administered the trust. So this really created some, focality in how it is delivered. So on the policy dialogue, of course, first stages, it's minimal. And then in the second stages, it was always reactive, donor-driven, anchored, it moved a little bit. Let's try to do some national planning, reform strategy. Maha started being asked to come up with its own priority. What is your strategic priority? And yes, some institutionalized dialogue between Maha and the partners started emerging, and this is with S2R2. So I think this paints a little bit the picture for you, and then when I'll move to the following slides, it will probably give rationale why I'll be characterizing the situation as I will characterize it. But let me quickly go over the TREF modality, and this is where we are at since 2021. So the purpose of TREF and the priority, and I think this is what is quite unique and also, in my opinion, building on a lot of lesson learned from the past and accepting, unfortunately, that we are in a region that will continue to be in crisis for such a long time. So let's do something about that. And the focus has shifted to strengthen system resilience and pooled governance via programmatic funding. It is jointly governed by Maha, UNICEF, EU, Germany, all as the main donor, France, Switzerland. And there is a strategic management board and SMB at both levels that really oversees implementation. This is really quite an advanced level of coordination from all the previous phases. Now what is being worked on is that we have a data system that is unified and try to have central reporting via Maha and the regional the RIOs. Also, we have the third-party verification for financial monitoring and through system teacher-student attendance, compliance with policies. There is also the strategic management board that ensures accountability, reports published and reviewed. And there is in terms of donor coordination, again, really high donor harmonization under pooled fund mechanism with shared outcomes and targets. And then the policy dialogue is really embedded in policy and reform dialogue that aligns with sector strategy and a 5-year plan that Maha has presented. For the monitoring tools, of course, the usage of the SIMS data. So this is kind of, I think, what paint the picture, the context that I walked in, that, with the start of this government. And I'll go quickly over those slides, which were really the reading of the insights in a way from those facts that were there. So the movement has been is that we're moving from temporary relief. It started as a temporary relief to establishing a dual system of education governance. Ministry of Education is two systems. There's almost like a set of experts that are there involved in facilitating the work. So this duality in the system, of course, and in many places they operate in parallel to the Maha systems. There were new units that were only included in the governance of the ministry that has not been accommodated by the ministry. We have an IT unit that only is donor driven. And also the financial department is two financial departments technically. So it's not really one. So really a very weak integration in that sense. So and of course, we are at a point the domestic funding can barely cover the salaries of the workers. So the teachers and everybody that works in the sector, from the ministry all the way to the schools. So also the aid delivery now, where we are at, is that it is really happening outside government channels, completely outside government channels, sometimes directly being funneled into the schools. Of course, this had a short-term benefit because it was a responsive modality and it ensured continuity of education services during crisis. It allowed rapid deployment of a humanitarian support. But in long-term consequences, it really reduced Maha ownership over planning and resource allocation. It's as if, it's not our business. There's this different entity taking care of that. So it created a disconnect between the provision for services and the structural adjustment needed to sustain them over time. Because they were treated as if it's just for now. So rather than the governance and the system adjusting itself to receive it and continue to be a partner in it, it wasn't the case. So yeah, instead of all the attempts, the institutional coordination and system-wide coherence within Maha is quite weakened by all these years of having to handle the crisis, which of course automatically, whenever we talk about weaker coherence, it means we cannot really speak of any development, we cannot speak of any reform because we're doing really patch services here and there. So, and that's exactly, like it leads into this other main thought, which is fragmentation, weakening the system as the system-wide impact. So we have separation given how the aid is being given between general and non-formal education. We have disconnected intervention across morning and afternoon shifts. It's not like a smooth flow, although they are the same teachers that are teaching in both shifts. And also the data system and reporting tools still is not super unified. So again, a lot of overlap, a lot of gaps, a lot of inefficiencies in the system, which led to mismatch between how much money is being invested and the outcome in terms of impact and system strengthening that are happening. And still within Maha, we have limited use of evidence in planning. And again, we have monitoring and evaluation happening for the aid delivery, but we have very little monitoring and evaluation happening for the regular operation within the ministry. And the main focus within the ministry is on input rather than the outcome. So despite the push and the requirements that are coming from the funders and the donors, we still kind of have not established that within the system. So the fact that we have the donor-funded payroll and has created this risk of long-term dependency. Again, like these were excellent modalities to respond to crisis, but then the fact that they have been there for too long, and the institution has become dependent on that, the teachers, the members of the Maha as well. There is confusion in the roles between the civil servants and the external consultants. Some of them have been there for a really long time. And, because they became expert and we want to tap into their expertise. There is inequities in the role. In one office, you can find people that are barely paid, sitting with people that are adequately paid, performing similar services within the same office. Again, and this made it really, really hard to do budget planning. And really, when we submit our budget, to really incorporate all the operation that's happening, because it's fragmented and it's not coming from one sources. So institutional capacity with that, in that sense, it got hollowed in two ways. In one way, because of the dependence on those wonderful experts that come to save the day, then there is less pressure on the local on the civil servants to really build their own capacity. And I'm talking here about institutional capacity. I'm not talking about teaching, about system capacity, not about teaching. We have wonderful teachers doing amazing job in very tough circumstances. But, so they did not feel the push that usually in institutions we feel, so that we improve our work. And then the ease of reaching to those experts made even the aspiring civil servant prefer to be contributing to the system through the workers, so as consultants rather than as civil servants. So it became, like civil servants kind of the underdog, and this is not, they are not the ones that are carrying the responsibility and the ownership of what's happening. Within the ministry, what I found also is that there is a limited voice in how the money is allocated, and because you have to accommodate the preferences of the donors. And of course, from one end, this is their right to have their own priorities, but on the other hand, they don't necessarily respond to the priorities that ensure the equity, whether it is regional equity, whether it is even within the schools, also the intensity of the crisis. Sometimes we have 10 days to come up with the name of the schools that the donor requires. So it's not necessarily seen as a selection that filled the gaps, and we are left with regions totally kind of marginalized and not really addressed. And again, I'm here not talking about the refugees service. This is kind of unified, is what the impact and implications on the system and the vulnerable children that are being served by Maha, by the public school system. So we have quite a bit of disparities. And again, this being constantly in this state of crisis, we're not given, not the donors, not the ministry has been given the chance to say, okay, we're over with the intervention, then how can we institutionalize that and really look at the impact? And these are happening almost like a whirlwind, really consecutively, really fast. So we cannot usually, when we talk about impact assessment, it needs a pause, it needs reflection, it needs time for figuring out the next wave of interventions and what's happening at this point, because of the intensity of the crisis, because of the complexity of the crisis. We're kind of jumping on that. So we're left with that we really don't have this clear map for reform again and development. So I guess this I talked about in terms of like it became obvious that we are there. Maha has really lost its agency, and I would even dare to say its role, despite the really intense effort, especially in the last phase, and the focus on the system strengthening of the donors, triggering Maha to say, you know, we really expect you to work on that, but it's like, you know, too tired. It's asking like almost asking somebody who has been sick for a long time and they are really exhausted by and fatigued to go and run a marathon, and you can't do that. So the vision is clear. The request is definitely what we need, and I've said that to many of our partners. I'm so thankful that this is part of what you are highlighting, but really we are at an impasse where this needs tremendous support so that we can really, and prioritizing so that we really can kickstart this system strengthening and work on reducing this dependency that have developed, you know, in Maha. So that's my concluding part, and just my where I am at. And you know, today I was visiting one of the teams trying to work on this initiative that we launched from the ministry, and they asked me, so what are we doing next month? What are we doing? We need a clear plan, give us clarity. And I said, we need to make a deal. We have that much clarity. We are in such a fluid environment. Everything is moving and shifting around us. So yes, I promise you, I'll tell you, we'll be 2 steps ahead, and I will be telling you what will happen in the next 2 months. But we have to remain adaptive and responsive, because we might need to adjust differently in the following 2 months. So what I'll show you is kind of this big picture, and what for me and my team in the minister office, you know, like we're trying to advance as our vision. The first part, and this is what I've been presenting also to our partners, to tell them, okay, we see the priority. So the first focus, so this is for under the attempt to say, we need that to remain effective in responding to the crisis. We're not pretending we're out. We're not bailing out of our responsibility, which I reiterate, to really educate every child in this country. We're not saying we don't want to do that, but we also are saying at the same time, we are really ready as a country to start thinking very seriously about reform and recovery, while being very realistic. While managing the crisis, we cannot wait for it to end. We have to start thinking in this mindset that we want to do recovery, we want to do development. So the focus areas, I think they serve both goals. We really need to work on digitization for system management, digitization as an entry point to really work with data, organize our data from the teaching classroom all the way to the governance of the ministry. So this is really central, and we're seeing it not only to look modern, but really to be triggered to build and refine our governance structure. The second focus, of course, it goes without saying, the pillars of any education system are the people who work there. So also we want to work on the deployment of teachers, the distribution, especially within the public sector, review that, and then go back to the regular, you know, what do we do with all these teachers, contractors? How can we make them ready to really move toward more development in their services? So there is work conditions we have to take care of, but also there is also putting them on, shifting their mindset and saying, we cannot be in education unless we have continuing professional development. So we need to do that to stay on the job and also we need to improve on who we recruit. So we're taking care of that. And of course, the principles, it goes without saying that they are also important for us. The third priority area is addressing the learning loss. And this is what we started. We already launched through the ministry without a project funded by donors. And I think we really wanted that to really regain our agency, to really demonstrate that even within the little margin that we have, exhausted teachers and not too many resources, we are ready to make the best out of it. And we have now data on 130,000 grade 1 to 6 students. They are there for the teachers to look at, the school to look at, and of course for the ministry to look at. And we are very excited to present that also to our donors so that they can as well align their priority to help us perform that role. So that's kind of the big priorities. And I'm big on we need a target. I need to think about a target. Research on improvement and reform always tells you, okay, what's the vision? What are you trying to achieve? So what we're trying to achieve is to really refocus reform on the school. And we always talk about the child. Teaching is focused on the child, and reform is focused on the school that really enable the teacher to focus on the child. So the idea is, this is what you see in color inside is actually the domains that we want to focus on. And this is system strengthening from the school, which is the closest institution around the child, all the way up, while acknowledging that we need to work on Maha improvement, of course, going from the school to the regional centers to Maha and all the other entities that support. We need all to align to be able to reach that target, which is that school, as well as we are aligning, and this is what you see in the outer two layers, the partnerships, and it is a huge priority for us, sustaining those. And this is not because of crisis, but I think banking on the fact that we have established this long-term relationship with amazing partners that can really support us to remain open to what is happening and also giving us an edge in what we do. So part of working on that is for the making sure that we are continuing with the crisis response, but it is also to affirm that Lebanon is a country that wants to remain open and interactive with on the global scale. So this is part of what we need to be sustaining. Okay, so with that, then we need to reclaim the sector coordination, and we are optimizing on what we are being offered by our current donor and the platforms, whether it's through TREF, whether it's through the LEG format that is also part of the GPE with UNESCO. So as a partner, coordinating partner, and all other donors. So we're really optimizing on that clarity that our donors and partners have, and trying to tell them, okay, let's all align in the same direction. And hopefully this will help us create some, to reclaim some system coherence, and establish a governance that allow us to work with crisis, but head to development. And as I said, really stay committed to transparency, equity, and policy consistency. So that's my concluded slide to say, we're trying really to have a target, apply what we have learned to strengthen the system, build on the partnership, and also to do that, we want to sustain the humanitarian commitment. Lebanon will continue to ensure education access for all learners that are there as part of its obligation, humanitarian obligations. We want to go from temporary solutions to lasting reform. So Maha currently is working hard to harvest all the learning that happened and leverage crisis era tools, system, and partnership to build long-term institutional resilience. We also are banking on a collective effort. I keep repeating in my office when somebody tell me, oh, we have so much hope in you, whether they are teacher unions all the way to partners, we are counting on you. We want to do that in collaboration, especially our long-term donor, UNICEF, UNESCO, the GPE, TREF, and others, the many others that are highlighting the systemic education reform. And we're hoping that this will take us in a new direction, especially for public education, and for a change that we will think that the light, best practices will come from the public sector and not just from the private sector. So we don't want to go to a return to the past, but a strategic course adjustment that is grounded in evidence, national capacity, and inclusive reform to close systemic gaps. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister and Dr. Rima Karami. Thank you for a very thought-provoking and a state of the reality of the education system in Lebanon. Thank you. We're going to go for questions once we're done with all of the introductions or the presentations for today. So I'm going to move now to Professor Maha Shuayb in the UK, who's the director of the Center for Lebanese Studies, for those of you who have just joined us. Maha, over to you.
Rachel. So thank you, Dr. Karami, for this presentation. I think what we have hoped in this session is to expose the details and the back end of what happens in the humanitarian education sector. Often the argument is we are enrolling refugees in the host country system because we're strengthening the host country. Now, Dr. Rima Karami showed us the complexity of doing this, which I think nicely leads to what you will talk to us about, Rabie and Nasser, because for those who are more familiar with donor agencies, the way also many of these or humanitarian agencies, they run like almost a business with project-based cycle, which sometimes can be very difficult for policymakers. So Dr. Rabie Nasser, I will introduce to you briefly, is one of the key scholars who have accompanied and researched the refugee crisis from different angles: political, economic, education. He's the director of the Syrian Center for Policy Research, which I all recommend you to go and visit their website. They have amazing publications and podcasts. And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you over the years, Rabie. Move on over to you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to use the mic there? Apparently, they're not hearing us very well. So they're encouraging speakers, if they can, to... I'm sorry, Rabie.
Cool.
Let's see if the sound will be better.
Is this better?
Is it better? Can you hear us well in Lebanon?
Thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here with you, and also with the colleagues in Lebanon and online. And as part of the Syrian Center for Policy Research, I will concentrate on the neoliberalism and the humanitarianism. Maybe I will highlight parts of the examples on education, but this will not be the focus of my talk. In this regard,
sorry, they're saying they can't hear anything.
They can.
They can.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
Yes, we can, but if we can move the camera. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. 4 issues I want to raise. The first one is about neoliberalism. The second one is humanitarianism. And of course, from critical point of view, we are using the critical theory, critical political economy, critical security study, too much critique, and post-colonialism. So this is the theoretical framework that we use usually in our analysis. We struggle to find out a homegrown theoretical background or framework to analyze such a complex conflict like Syria. At the end, I might highlight partly the Syria case, but my concentration will be on the arguments behind the humanitarianism, how it's formulated around neoliberalism. So the first point, especially during the conflict, we can't like save lives and counter conflict with the same tools that is a root for the conflict. So the first issue is about neoliberalism. The foundation of this, it is a root of the conflict in Syria, at least we argue that, as it's increased inequalities, it's concentrated the power and the wealth with an elite that is not interested in public inclusivity, environmental sustainability, etc. We have proof of that across the region. And this has been repeatedly used as an argument that neoliberalism will increase efficiency, will increase for the people, will trickle down. And all of us know that at least after the 2008, we don't have this claim anymore. So we are increasing rapidly, not just in the south, in the north as well, inequalities based on the new economic policies. The core assumption behind that people are self-interest. This is the only motivation that is count. And it became like a common sense because this has been used repeatedly to tell us that we don't have any motivation. So solidarity, working for public interest is not a real motivation. Even if you are in public office, you are working for your self-interest. This has been repeated to tell us that the only motivation is the selfish one. So we have to be individual to be efficient. The second one, that the public institutions is a collection of these private interests. So it's better not to trust the public institutions. So individual institution is the best way, and the best way to deal with the private interest is through market. So our only way to have our social interactions and economic interactions is through market. The dangerous part of this, that the market became the upper hand over political and social spheres. We saw that in the last 40 years, and we can understand now how the war started and justified by an economic incentive. I think when we see that UN, IFIs, states, and non-state actors in a country like Syria, they all adopt neoliberal policies, I will doubt it a bit before we say that this is the solution. HTS, before the fall of Assad regime, they adopted neoliberal policies. The Assad regime, the same. The support from Western countries supported this reform for neoliberal part, and UN agencies, now you can see the reports between IMF, World Bank, UNDP about development, but it's always a cement, or the core of it is on neoliberal policies. The key issue here that we are talking about elitism. There is an elite who understand how to deal with the market, the economy, the political part, but the rest of the people are the popular opinion, which is always not in the right direction. So this is just to say that what we are facing is a doctrine that is repeatedly used to convince us that we are looking for a sustainable development while we are implementing from the humanitarianism. We are using the humanitarianism to follow what we are saying now about neoliberalism. In this regard, I will start by this. Like, if you look for NGOs, how it shifted between 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, how we shifted from trade unions, for example, social movements, toward a service-based NGOs, including in the North, you can see that it is not anymore an organic social institutions that bring these voices of the people toward the public institutions. It's always a small service-based achievement that marketing the achievement. One example of that, if you are doing working with NGOs or NGOs, and you are serving like 1 per 1,000 of the refugees, you celebrate it as if you are covering the problem. This is including the UN as well. So this is part of the market mentality that you are trying to say, we are the most successful story in the world, and then we have to be funded and the donors should support us, while the core of the problem is still continue. That if you are doing the right thing. So imagine if you are not doing the right thing, like the humanitarian approach, to say that for refugees, it's enough for basic education, because we don't have the luxury to give them like more than that, let alone thinking about social participation or their political rights, because this should be forgotten as they are under class. Another part of this is the gap with the people. When you focus to be a professional, institutionalized NGO, you start to think about the donors, because you have to be presenting your blog frame, your objectives, your evaluation in the right way. And this will be your counterpart. And you start to have the gap with the population. Our surveys with the communities, it's amazing how many times that we find the lack of trust between the communities and the NGOs, let alone the UN. But even with the NGOs, we have this lack of trust, because now we are talking about a small elite that are following and a big elite that it's creating a gap with the people. And it's really not just like a propaganda to claim that there is a problem with the civil society. You can see in the Arab Spring how a social movement appeared, that it's across countries. It's very simple. We don't have at that time like a capacity building on using the media or using the digital platforms, but the people react and use it very efficiently for public interest. But after that, you can see the deterioration, how we reform our NGOs and our social movement into a very service-based. Sometimes we subordinated to the key actors. We repeated the narrative of Sisi or the narrative of Assad or narrative of different actors in the Gulf countries, because the donor is dominated these. In our survey for prices in Syria, the civil society fresh graduate wages, it's almost 3 to 4 times the private or public officers. So you also see that there is a private incentives for this sector. So it's not the sector that serves the people. Now it's a sector that is influential in terms of incentive. So I think this is another way. If you compare it to the UN officers, because the UN officers don't want to lose their position, it's a very important position. It's very good income. It's very social status important part. And the headquarters don't want to claim challenging the political actors. Also, this is another layer of being an officer or an employee in this public institution. So it's not a mandate to counter the conflict or the foundation of the conflict. The mandate is to sustain or maintain the, I would say, dysfunction of the humanitarianism. Now, apolitically, you mentioned this, Maha, and I think this is really interesting, because we are working to save lives from like a dictatorship. And when you see that this saving life is going to be in harmony with this dictatorship, so we have also to question what we are doing on the ground. And I can say the same about refugees. Like, you can't say that I want to give rights to refugees while a government in Lebanon or in Turkey or in Jordan or other countries, they are suppressing, marginalized most of the refugees, and you want to have like knowledge policy bridge by talking to, without really navigating the power or making some challenging or accountability for them. So this is another gap that we find it in the role of the civil society. I don't want to exceed my time, but I will concentrate on this overlap between those, that countering the idea of resilience, as you can see as a key part of understanding why we are doing the humanitarian work. One example I will give in Syria, that when we discussed with the UN head agencies in 2013 that we need an alternative development for Syria to counter the conflict foundations, they said, this is not the right time, people are dying. As if their strategy is to save lives. But after 12 years from that day, they are repeating the same strategy. They repeat as if there is an earthquake in Syria, so they want to serve the people, so they have to distribute food baskets and they have to give some shelters, and they don't want to think about education or any citizenship foundations. So I think also it's easy to do. It's easier to distribute services compared to build governance or to build solidarity or to counter oppression. Unfortunately, there is a lot of these foundations continue in Syria even after the fall of Assad regime. 2 or 3 examples I can give before I say something about the alternative. You know, the sanctions on Syria is one example. So most of the civil society don't work on something developmental or governance because this is under the sanctions. You can't do that in Syria before the fall of Assad regime. You can't even mention it. Some of the UN officers told the civil society several times, don't write about governance development because this is reconstruction, and reconstruction help Assad regime. So keep it humanitarian. So we start to do education through humanitarian, health through humanitarian. So you try to adopt that. And the claim was that these sanctions are small. So it's not affecting the community. It's not affecting the Syrian people. It's affecting the Syrian regime. Now, after the fall of Assad regime, the officers from the EU and from USA, they said, we have to help the Syrian people by lifting the sanctions because the sanctions are making their life worse. So this is an example how the civil society adopted in both cases. If the first one is to normalize the work with what the donors said, and then they became to say, okay, we have to lift the sanctions, let's make a release for the Syrian lives.
1 minute.
If there is 1 minute, I would say emancipatory humanitarianism can be an alternative if we go to the foundation. Like we need an alternative to way that we are funding civil society or NGOs or education. By reforming, of course, the state, because now the main idea is to shrink the state, but also to have the solidarity economy or to think alternative about how to build economy that respects people, justice, and respect environment as well. So the alternative economy is not a luxury from this point of view. The second thing is emancipatory citizenship. We are reproducing by education a new doctrine to suppress people. Either as a refugee, I am learned in different countries how to be suppressed because I can't speak Portuguese in Lebanon or in Turkey or in Jordan unless it's accepted by the regime there. And I can't speak this inside Syria. So we have to see how this education can be part of the emancipatory citizenship, how to be a citizenship for the future, especially for the young generation. Otherwise, we are reproducing the conflict in different perspective. And the last point is the solidarity. As if, as we implementing any civil society or education or a humanitarian project, we have to think about improving governance of this, the relation with the society, and improving solidarity. This should be one target from this. I will close with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabie. Over to you, Professor Cathrine Brun. Thank you.
It's on. I'll try again. Dear colleagues and friends, Your Excellency, you made my job very difficult and very easy. Because we had already had the conversation about some of these developments, and I also wanted to add to this. In my presentation, I want to build on what has been said so far in this session, but also earlier today by Maha. And my aim was to reflect on the impact or interaction of humanitarian funding and education governance in Lebanon. And I will try to improvise a little bit so I don't repeat everything that has been said earlier. And let me start. We're sorting out the slides. Let me start with why we want to focus on governance research. At CLS, we had already engaged with governance in education as a result of the Syria crisis. And as Maha talked about earlier, we had addressed this tension between the inherently long-term vision of education and the short-term humanitarian perspectives. When we joined the education research in conflict and protracted crisis program funded by UK Aid, it started with developing a research agenda for education in Lebanon. This was in 2024, the early months of 2024. And we did a number of stakeholder consultations. And the clear message from all stakeholders was that research that was most needed in education in Lebanon was on governance. What distinguishes education governance in Lebanon? What are important policy processes? Who are the key actors? How do they relate to each other? And what can we do to see the development of more locally and nationally grounded policies that reach the implementation stage? This was all suggested in the context of what was seen as a governance crisis, a system of clientelism, corruption, low trust by donors towards the ministry, and among the ministry, teachers and families in the country as well. But it was also seen, I think, as important due to lack of transparency in governance and not least the opaque role of donors and international aid in the governance of education. I think the minister today has helped us to unpack some of these processes already. Thank you very much for doing that. And one concrete suggestion from stakeholders was to analyze the general 5-year plan for education from 2021 to 2025. It's the one that's valid now. It has been extended. This was the first general education plan after the more emergency-oriented plans, so RAISE 1 and RAISE 2, since the beginning of the Syria crisis. So we used the 5-year plan as a starting point, analyzed its emergence, development, and content, compared with previous plans to understand the changing conditions under which education governance took place. And we did a number of informal conversations to start the research with the different people who had been involved in the process and others. We then did 11 formal interviews with government staff, current and former, donors, experts, and consultants. But we also did a very thorough document analysis of previous plans and policy documents, and very interestingly went back to a number of the biographies and self-reflections that people who have been involved in governance in Lebanon in previous years had published. We also analyzed articles from media outlets, etc. If we can go to the next slide. So the current 5-year plan for education was formulated by international consultants. From our conversations and interviews, it became clear that there had been limited involvement from local and national institutions in formulating the plan. The interviewees expressed limited ownership among the national actors, and some interviewees suggested that the plan itself was to some extent just a performance. It was seen as a donor requirement that needed to be in place for funding to materialize. And several interviews suggested that the plan symbolized this parallel donor-led system that you were talking about, meaning parallel to the ministry-led governance system, a system that was not embedded in the ministry and that as a result did not help to strengthen the system. These observations led us to go deeper into the functionings of governance of education and to analyze the particular ways in which the humanitarian approach had impacted on the governance of education. Reflecting on the last 2 decades or so of interaction of education governance and aid, it is the emergence of this parallel system that I wanted to focus on in the remainder of the very short presentation. And now I can make it even shorter because what we have already heard. But I want to make a few observations. So first, just let me say a few things about the Lebanese education system, even though some extent has been said already. The Ministry of Education and Higher Education, Maha, is responsible for general education, both public and private, technical and vocational training, and higher education. From the centralized ministry extends a fragmented network of at least 49 government bodies, along with regional and local bodies and schools. So we're talking about quite a complex system to try to understand. There's a civil servant hire freeze since 1998, which was reinforced in 2017 and still ongoing, which has weakened human resources in the ministry, as has been said earlier. And the Civil Servant Board has not updated its testing and hiring protocols since the 1990s, making it hard to establish relevant posts needed for a changing society. Maha also lacks its own policy department. The Center for Education Research and Development, CERD, was established in 1973 and should have this role, but has not played that role very actively in recent years. International funding to the education sector has been instrumental in keeping the sector running. And again, it's been difficult to establish numbers, but based on some of the research that CLS has done, figures from Ministry of Finance appears that the education sector received $1.2 billion through direct loans, grants, and financial aid contracts between 2011 and 2021. We have also seen that the Lebanese Ministry of Education received a total of $2.5 billion in direct and indirect loans, grants, and donations in the same period, but in both cases excluding unsigned agreements with the Lebanese state. So over to the emergence of the parallel system, and I will go very briefly through this. And because I was short of time, I did it very, very quickly and only did 3 phases. So I compromised the phases that we saw earlier. And let me move to the post-Civil War stage, because I think it's important to establish already from the end of the Civil War how this parallel system started to emerge and the role of international donors in this. After the Civil War formally ending in 1990, the education system was shattered. There was a strong will to re-establish the confidence in the public system. But at this point, from the documentation that we have found, it's also clear to see that the process was quite locally led, while still dependent on aid. The government institutions and local experts were really at the center of developing policies. However, at the same time, there was an increasing centralization in the ministry. And in 2000, the World Bank granted a loan for the Education Development Project, the EDP. And this is a significant development. The EDP was supported by EU and USAID and other international actors as well. But during this stage, the EDP established the first program management unit, which was the first sort of unit that acted independently of the ministry, but took part in governance. I think this is a significant milestone in establishing the private or the parallel system. And also, I think at this point and during this period, another significant development was that the 2010 to 2015 General Education Plan was developed under World Bank leadership and the EDP in collaboration with private research center in the country, which made the shift from policymaking in the ministry to move outside the ministry. So I think this is very important developments to highlight already from that period. If we move to the Syria refugee crisis, thank you, Maria. It also helped to reshape Lebanon's education governance. And we have already heard quite a lot about this, about the fragment with decision-making increasingly dispersed between UN agencies and the ministry, contributing to consolidate these parallel systems. There was also political shifts and ministers who saw the opportunity of the refugee crisis as a way of funding parts of the sector, which I think is entirely legitimate because it was a pressure on the sector. In 2014, the ministry, supported by humanitarian organizations and donors, took the lead in refugee education efforts and making the public sector the main schooling channel for Syrians. Under strong donor influence, the Reaching All Children with Education, RAISE 1 and later RAISE 2 programs, in many ways replaced general education plans and cemented this parallel system. The RAISE program operated through a new program management unit, again, separate from the ministry, formal ministry structures. Donor-funded PMU staff, backed by significant international funding and strong personalities, gained a dominant and highly influential role in the education system. It was believed that having a separate unit focused on the response to the refugee crisis and outside of the regular administrative structures would avoid overburdening the system. And I think this is the key point and very important because it had a discourse of a fragile system that was not, had the capacity to deal with this on their own. Due to the civil servant hiring freeze and what was considered as incapacity on the part of the ministry, many donors paid for consultants to do some of the governance work in the ministry and in CERD. So the consultants are not always integrated into the ministry structures and are accountable more to donors than to the ministry. At this time, donors exercised significant influence over budget allocations and spending priorities, and donor funding played an important role in keeping the education system going. We must not forget that. Also, the increasing centralization of the ministry continued with more power and control at the top. And only the World Bank funding, the so-called S2R2, referred to earlier, went through official government channels. It was the only funding that was subject to parliamentary scrutiny. All other funding was going outside those channels. In 2017, the World Bank described major gaps in the ministry's financial management. In response to corruption, deepened mistrust after the 2009 financial collapse and the 2020 Beirut blast, donors increasingly avoided government channels for financial transactions, opting instead to fund schools, teachers, and families directly. So at this point, it leads us to the present day period that we can discuss now, or perhaps the period up until February 2025 when the new government was formed. I will use some insights about this period as a way of concluding. So far, I have showed that international donors contributed to make a parallel structure to deal with the refugee crisis. The parallel structure materialized through separate units, not embedded in the ministry, hiring of external consultants, as well as transferring of funds outside formal government channels. Crucially, these structures often emerge as the most pragmatic decisions to get things done in what was believed to be the most efficient way, given the limitations of the system and the political will in the country. But as Maha showed, the donor strategies did not strengthen the existing governance system, resulted in only 30% of Syrian children enrolling in formal or informal schooling, while the public school system continued to be marginalized. So in this way, we could conclude that despite all efforts in international funding, the progress was not commensurate to the efforts. In 2021, at around the same time of the launch of the new General Education Plan, I had an encounter with a UN official in Beirut discussing the so-called Humanitarian Development Nexus. I was told by these UN officials, in Lebanon, we have given up on development. We only do short-term assistance. The 5-year plan that came about in 2021 and alongside the new multi-donor initiative of TREF mentioned earlier was an attempt to turn the tide towards long-term development, to establish the conditions for strengthening the national system and for moving away from parallel systems by dismantling the PMU from RAISE, for example. But there is still more to be done. And I think a key question, and again, I will follow the logic of the minister here, there is now a need to reestablish the trust in the government to handle financial transactions and to strengthen the civil servant body and management structures. And as we have heard many times now and today, an often repeated argument and explanation for the humanitarian model and lack of progress in developing the education sector is that the country is riddled by crisis after crisis. Funding intended for long-term development was often channeled to emergency assistance during these crises. And undoubtedly important, but should we accept that? Can we learn from what we have seen over the last years and turn the tide a bit more? What can we learn? So just to my last slide. There is some research, both in education and in humanitarian studies, that show that it is important to start thinking long-term from the early stages. However, the exceptionalism that the humanitarian approach enabled, the short funding cycles, and the national politics of forced migration restricted the ability and willingness to think long-term. Our research has also showed us that development in the humanitarian development nexus is often very minimalist. Its understanding of long-term change is resting on the individual's ability to be self-reliant rather than focusing on structural and systemic change. And here, Minister, I would like to also challenge you. You said you were starting with the school. I think it's important, but also if we want to think development, if we want to question development, maybe we also need to see what is the role of education in the society. And I hope we can discuss the meaning of development in this context. As researchers and academics, I think also we need to do more groundwork in developing together with the people in the education sector a deeper understanding of what that change should look like. And I hope that this is why we start with the school. It's the teachers and it's people in the system. So added to this question, I would like to ask, what can lead to lasting change that is not undone by changing governments? And this leads to another central question of how we can move central mechanisms from these exceptional parallel systems into the governance system. Two final points. I'm sorry, I'm going over time, but I had to improvise a little bit to speak to what had been said before. Two final points. Many interviewees in our research emphasized that accountability mechanisms are already in place in Lebanon, and that these should be reactivated and re-empowered. But perhaps a stronger coalition of actors that can hold the government accountable would also be important to fix this, because moving more of the current practices from the parallel system into government would require, I think, increased trust in the government as well, specifically with international donors. And I'm happy to see, Minister, that you're promoting this. And I hope that the dialogue with donors can take place more transparently than it has been, and in open spaces, and involve a range of key actors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cathrine. We're going to open up the space. We're going to take a bit from the coffee time. And yes, sorry. Yes. We're going to take a little bit from the coffee break time, and we're going to open up for a couple of questions in Lebanon, then a couple of questions online. So please, if you have any questions, state who you are and who the question is addressed towards. But I think the minister would like to say something. Please go ahead.
Just maybe answer first. Thank you very, very much about, I think it was a wonderful complementarity in the session and all the ideas added to each other. And I didn't see any repetition, more insight and more granular understanding of a very complex situation that we are in. I just wanted to, go back to reiterate that I totally agree with you that we have to ask these big questions. And not just because we have faced the crisis and the protracted crisis, but also because as educators, we are at a juncture where we have to rethink what is the role of education anyway, and then try to reshape our governance and all our services and aligning with that. So first, I want to say that. But again, to go back to what I'm suggesting, will will serve both purposes, because we cannot deny that we have to respond quickly. We cannot deny that. I wish we can make the kids wait. I wish we can tell them, can you stop growing? Can you stop coming? And let us fix ourselves and then come back to serve you. We cannot. So they are coming. So injecting the focus and the capacity building and the system thinking at the school level. And that's why it's not just about strengthening their ability to teach, but rather strengthening their ability to be part of a governance structure. And in the absence of that completely, the smallest unit to bring that into their attention will be the school. So as members of the school, you make them better professionals, but then you make them members of a governance structure, of a system, and then you enable them to really be ready for the big, like more what I would characterize as more top-down thinking about how you can really improve the system. So yeah, it's more about where you start. That's you're challenging me, so no, but I mean, it's where we start with our capacity building while we're keeping a 360-degree view. And again, all research about improvement talk about coherence, which I mentioned, but it also talk about holistic, and all systems that have education systems that manage to improve and really make breakthroughs are the one who really adopted this holistic approach. So thank you. Very thought-provoking and enriching contribution, Cathrine. Okay.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to start with any questions. Yes, Suha, over to you.
Thank you. Suha Tutunji from Jusur. Thank you very much. I have the rule of three: a question, a suggestion, and a comment. First of all, this is wonderful, the strengthening the system in the ministry, and it's something that we personally am looking forward to, and I'm sure my colleagues as well. But I hope this will continue, and you won't leave us in a year and a half, and then we'll start all over again, and because this was a trend. So I don't know whether we can continue with this work. Then I also know that you, Dr. Karami, you also work a lot on students' voice. So was this a part of the strengthening? Could you please elaborate more on students' voice? Because this, for me, is very important too. They are the ones who are receiving the work, so we should listen to what they're telling us and their suggestions. Some of them are brighter than we are, so I mean, we should listen to them. And then a question for both Cathrine and Dr. Karami. Maybe we should look a little bit at, Lebanon has had a history of refugees. First, the Armenian community. I don't like to use the word refugee because it has a negative connotation. But, well, this is what everyone's using. So we had the Armenian, the Palestinian, and the Syrian. And I wonder if we can learn from these past experiences. The Armenian experience has been quite successful with their integration into the community and their schools and their system. So why did this work? The Palestinian was in some way successful with the UNRWA, and they had their education, although during the past few years they have gone problems because of politics, we know all that. And while for the Syrian community, it hasn't been as successful. So I wonder if there is some comparison or a study that we can do or something that we can, compare these three and learn from these experiences, especially the Armenian that was, in my opinion, is quite successful, and to move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments and the questions. From a sustainability point of view, like this is not like a job that it's a mission. But on a serious note, it's very much on my mind from day one, given the short period, to think about, I would call it not sustainability, but succession. because we have to also honor whoever will take over this, their view, how they will look at what has been achieved. And I'm hoping that by the time we leave, the circumstances has shifted in the right direction. So it will be probably enriching to get a fresh perspective from that point, not from where I got it. So yes, that's why on my team, the first piece that is super important is documentation. And that's something I came that was not there. Having this collective, so the information are scattered with all the stakeholders that have been involved. So I'm trying at least to leave behind, all this information for people to come and look at it. And then hopefully, again, instead of doing just a political, ceremonial handover, that it can be probably a workshop where whatever has been done. And again, this is my hope that this, whatever will happen in the next 12 months, that it won't be only in the minister office, but rather gradually. The first 3 months we needed it as positioning ourselves, figuring out what's happening, but then now as we start moving, we will move with partners, we will move with hopefully the civil servants, the teachers that are in place. So very much on my mind, I'm very much, that's again my scholarly mission and very important goal, that we need to build systems, and systems need long-term thinking and sustainability. Okay, the student voice. It got me into a lot of heat because that was my first move that I've done, and the first group that I triggered, like I went to them to ask them. The others came to me and I went to them. I strongly believe as an educator, especially in in this time, 2025, that we need to be talking to them. And it is not like giving them voice. We need to listen to their voice. They have plenty of voice. They are making us irrelevant because they are the one managing what is happening in the universe. So we better allow and embrace and listen. مع إنه هلا مبينة إنه I haven't listened to what they want on the exams. I'm kind of butting heads with them, and insisting on my being stubborn for other reasons. But yes, and the model I presented in the school, the component and the dimension about student voice is there. So it's not teacher probably by saying student focus, not as recipients at all, but rather as partners and as very active agents of joining in to figure out what would it look like to really transform the system, and we really need to engage in that. So I'll jump quickly and leave the floor. I think the last question is pretty tough. I'm not sure. I'm someone who like to honor history, take lessons from it, definitely. But I believe we have to be careful about how we learn lessons at this point. The complexity that we are in, the novelty of the situation, not just on us, but also on the people that should have something to say to us, typically. Like we always think of ourselves in the South that, somebody can tell us, have wisdom. Nobody has the wisdom. Nobody. And definitely nobody has the wisdom for us, because it's so complex and in different manners. And this includes the past. So I will go to the past for lessons as a researcher, exactly like I will go to the literature. I have multiple resources to look at, not one. I don't go to one book, I go to multiple books. So yes, definitely one of our resources to look back, but not to invest too much energy there, because what we really need, and I will end on this point, is sharpening our skills to acutely understand our current context. We are in moving sands. We are not even standing on solid ground. So we don't have that luxury. All we can do is to open all our antennas, understand what is surrounding us, try to make sense of it, act understand, stop, and that's my bias and that's who I am. I'm an action researcher. I research, I act, I stop again, I think, I make sense of it, and then I act again. And I think this is where we are in general in the education system, but also in an area with a protracted, continued crisis that is very complex. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karami. Do you want to quickly respond, Cathrine, before we move to the UK?
Yeah, just very quickly. I agree with you, but I also think so. You have a very interesting point, and I think it would be interesting, I think, to look at the interaction between local responses, the national responses, and the international responses, and how it has changed. Because I think there are paradigms globally that I think has affected the opportunity to respond locally. And also how maybe locally we could influence what's happening globally anyway. So maybe there is a case for going to these different situations that you're talking about to understand the interaction between these different scales. As a geographer, I'm talking about that because I think there is something in it. I mean, we have research from other contexts where we see how local responses in education in refugee crisis have been very important and more efficient than the global response, for example. So this could be something that we could learn from. So I think it's an interesting case, but I agree that it's also a very fast changing picture. So we also need to keep that in mind.
Thank you very much, Cathrine. I know we have a few other hands up here, but I'm just going to hand it over to Maha in case there are people in the UK that have some questions. And then for this, if we do still have more time, we'll follow up here. Maha, over to you.
Well, I think we have time only for one quick question. So, yes. Anyone who has a very urgent question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it's just a comment rather than question about the history and how we can learn from the history of the refugees in Lebanon, for example, Palestinians, Syrians, and Armenians. I would say like lots of things that happened maybe in Lebanon and in the region is out of hand of maybe the policies of the government themselves. When it comes to the Palestinians, for example, the Palestinian example, there is an agency called UNRWA that is taking care of the education of the Palestinians in Lebanon until grade 12. With Syrians, they don't have something like that. So as Rabie said, they're taking care of only the basic education, maybe elementary at the best, okay? And that's maybe the main difference. So we still actually don't have the control over, the education, the overall control of the education of the refugees in Lebanon. With the Armenians, it's a complete different story. When they fled from Armenia, they came to the country before it was a country, before the establishment of the country it is. But how we can learn from that? I think, yes, we can learn, because I think the education is very much linked to the market, and we can see how many they're prohibited, whether Palestinians or maybe Syrians or others, from practicing, let's say, certain jobs in Lebanon. I don't say like this is maybe exclusive to Lebanon. We can see maybe some other, maybe I would say, unsuccessful examples also in some other areas. I think maybe sometimes progressing is in Lebanon somehow, but still it's not maybe up to our ambitions, I would say.
Thank you very much. Okay, unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but I hope we have time to talk to each other over break.